Now, across Africa, the gap between the housing need and housing delivery remains quite vast. Closing that gap requires not just political will, but technical expertise as well as on the ground partnership. This is the Africa Urban Forum podcast. My name is Terry Anchebet. Now, our guest leads UN Habitat's work across the African continent. His office supports governments, cities, and communities in turning housing policies into real homes. Oumar Sylla is the director of the UN Habitat Africa office. Thank you so much for making time to be with us this
Thanks for
afternoon.
having me.
Oumar, we've been listening to conversations all day, and we will, over the next couple of days, listen to the challenges, opportunities that exist within the housing space for African governments. Given your work across the continent, what would you say is the most common challenge that UN Habitat sees across African countries when trying to develop or scale up adequate or affordable housing?
Thank you so much for inviting me to this very complex and also very important conversation for the African continent. As you ask about challenges, first thing we should acknowledge the figures. It's very striking. Rapid urbanization in the continent, and you talk about 3 to 4% of urban growth, depending on the country you talk about. Today, you talk about 800 million people living in cities, and by 2030, Africa will be reaching what we call the urban transitions, which means that more people live in cities than rural area. You need to house those people. You need to give them infrastructure. You need to give them food. You need to give them schools. So, which means that in terms of data, of course, do we really know the gap of housing in Africa? One challenge. And this conversation can be reflected at the local level as well and the country level, because right now, from the perspective of UN Habitat, we have been analyzing many policies, many programs on housing, but we feel that there's a need to fill this gap on data, because to be able to address this housing gap, you need to know what is needed on that. And that's why the data aspect is very important. Today, I think the figure is varying from 50 million, we say in Africa, or 60 million, and a lot of speculation. That's one element. We need to understand what we are addressing. When we talk about the deficit of housing in Kenya, in Senegal, of course, we need to know what is the deficit. The second challenge is policy and direction. I mean, we see in Africa, many countries just start talking about, program on housing and putting a number of that without knowing how to go about it. It's about planning. The housing sector and as sector is about planning, financial planning, strategic planning, community planning, even to make sure really you set a direction and target yourself. And this direction will help you understand what are the gaps, what are the challenges, and how to overcome those challenges when it's about policy orientation, when it is about budget decision. I think it's very, very important to have this sense of direction. And this direction, what you call through UN Habitat, strategic engagement, the housing policy will lead you to the strategy of addressing the housing challenge you are talking about. Of course, sometimes member state will tell you, oh, it's just blah, blah policy strategy. You want to build a house. How are you going to build a house if you don't understand your macroeconomic system? How all these elements are related? Because when you talk about housing, it's not only the roof. Housing are related to many sectors. First of all, I will come to that, the financial sector. You cannot do housing without link to national development planning. And that way arbitration on use of national resources being done. You cannot talk about housing today without talking about climate change. How are you going to address? Because you need resilience building. You are in Kenya, you know what I'm talking about. And as this country, Mozambique, West Africa, Nigeria, even Zambia, recently speaking. Another important point, the challenge, of course, is the financing. As I mentioned, we cannot isolate the housing from the microeconomic dimension. They are interrelated. The way you're going to address your housing needs depend on the health of your financial situation and your economical situation. If you have a deficit, you cannot subsidize. If you have a deficit, you'll go another loan, And I think that's an important discussion going on. Is that the role of the central government to build a house? Or his role is just putting in place enabling environment? You cannot. I don't see. Of course, you have some country doing that. I think we need to find a balance. Bring in private sectors as a solution, but also looking into what we call blending financing system, bring in development financial institution and others to look at this. And I think this is the elephant in the room in Africa when it comes to housing delivery. That's why I believe that these 3 day conversation are very important and critical for Africa to know in which way we're going to handle these issues of affordable housing in our particular context of climate crisis, of course, but also on financial crisis.
Yeah. Oumar, you've touched on the financing, and I'd just like us to delve a little bit deeper into that, because almost every speaker who has stood up, has said Africa needs to be more innovative in how we're thinking about financing adequate housing. From your experience, both locally and globally, uh, is there a direction that we should be looking at as a continent? I know you've mentioned blended finance. Is there anything else that has worked? Maybe some low level, some low lying fruits that the continent can quickly pick on.
No, I mean, I'm in Kenya here. I've been living in Kenya for 10 years. I've been following the earth conversation on the financing of housing, is a housing levy. But I think despite all the controversy, it's a very innovative way of financing and creating and cutting the dependencies on external loan, where you burden the loan and bringing kind of contributions of all citizens on the housing. Because as I mentioned, when the housing sector is booming, economy will boom and people will get jobs. To respond to your question, if you want to finance housing, get job to young people. Make sure people can get job, because today in Africa, the self-building is more than 80% of the all housing construction. Those are people going and getting their loan. Give a chance to get a revenue and to save and to be able to be bankable for a loan. That's the only way to. That's, I can say, the most efficient way of promoting. That's why the hand and the role intervention of the government is central on that. I talk about the enabling environment the government should put in place, and the enabling environment could lead as well in a takeoff of the economic system. From there, people can take something, take up jobs, but also create jobs for others. This one element. Second element as well, I think there's a model that works in many countries, the cooperative system, where people bring their saving and put it together in the bank, and from there, revolving wise, and they can be able to get the access to the fund to help build. Still, the challenge we are facing in Africa when it's come to that, the interest rate is too high sometimes. And I think that's the challenge all Africa is facing. Many countries today, I mean, interest rate in many countries is 2 digits. I live in Canada. When I bought my house, it was 3% interest rate from the bank. Can you imagine here in Kenya, 10 to 13, 14, depending who you're dealing with. And same situation in Africa. How to minimize it, and that way as well as the financial regulation system has a role to play. How we can infuse this liquidity in the system and give more guarantee and the risking system to the bank to lower the interest rate. That's why the bank doesn't trust us, because there's no guarantee. We're going to pay for the failure of payment. So there are many, it's not casting stone. Every country is trying to devise different form of financing. But what is clear, the role of government is fundamental on subsidizing when possible, but at the same time works with private sectors and cooperative system to unlock those finance system can lessen this gap of housing deficit.
Now, informal settlements are growing as fast as urbanization is growing. Some of the data we're seeing, around 60% of Africans live in informal settlements. What are your thoughts around, or perhaps maybe something the UN Habitat has done or advised governments in terms of how do you manage the growth of informal settlements, or
Organize.
reorganizing the settlements without pushing these people out who have all come to the urban areas for some sort of economic reasons?
I mean, I've been working in this sector for many years. But my observation is sometimes we are not addressing the root causes of informality. And when it comes to root causes, you have two factors: spatial dimension, because the master plan in the city is not respected, and there's no governor as such on the cities where people can establish themselves where they want. And that situation we are seeing. How we can find a stream where we can enforce those regulations and come to spatial. The second part is a spatial dimension. I talk about spatial dimension, but second part is economic dimension again. You need to find a balance between rural and urban when it comes to development. Today, people, this pull factor we are talking about, what triggers the pull factor? People are looking for a better life. You have drought in many parts. You have climate change crisis. You have conflict crisis in many parts. People will come to cities for a better life. How to anticipate those elements? In a normal context, of course, it's advisable to bring those services to rural area. When they have schools, they have access to services, water, sanitation, electricity. I don't think people will not come to cities, but the rate will go down. This is some element we need to look at. The really, structural causes of this informal. For me, I mean, as an African as well, I believe that until we got the good governance system and leadership system to enforce our planning rules and policies, it's going to be difficult to prevent those elements. It's not generating informality. Sometimes it's about traffic jam, something else, garbage collection, even some area, which means that we need to bring this civism conversation in the cities. What is the obligation of the cities? What the obligation of central government? What's the obligation of citizens? It's shared responsibility. Governing cities share responsibility. Now, of course, we need to look for solution. In UN Habitat, we have been doing what we call slum upgrading, what we call the in situ slum upgrading, supporting, informal settlement on restructuring a bit, the spatial dimension, the land tenure system, access of basic services. But now where we are is more about the concept of transformation. There's many mechanisms for transformation. You have what we call the system of land value capture, where you can place the value of land to invest on informal settlement to improve living condition by providing houses and by bringing private sectors. That's the reason why if you look at our strategic plan as UN Habitat, we have three pillars. One is about housing. The second one is about land, because land is related to whatever we are talking about. And the third one is basic services. And when it comes to basic services, it's looking into the deprivation of people living in informal settlement. And right now we are collaborating with many institutions here, even SADC. You heard this morning the statement of SADC. We are collaborating with SADC to give some guidance to many SADC countries how they're going to deal with informality, bringing various experience and also bring various mechanisms that have been tested in Latin America or other countries to see how we can help African cities to resolve this issue and informalities.
Oumar, there's a rallying call for a common African voice when it comes to matters housing, affordable housing. And at the end of the 3-day forum, there will be a Nairobi declaration. What are your expectations on what that would look like?
My expectation is very simple. I want this matter to be tabled in the African Union. I don't see this issue get the attention it deserves in national policies and internally speaking. I mean, this year the topic of the African Union is water and sanitation, which is fine. When in urban sectors, the water and sanitation, how much is it affecting people's life in terms of scarcity, in terms of crisis, but also in terms of opportunity. For me, our goal as UN Habitat from these 3 days engagement is more about strengthening the political commitment. If we have the will as Africa, we will be able to deal with many of those issues, including the housing crisis. One day, our dream is to see one of these African Union summit tabling housing urbanization in Africa. What are the opportunities we should be harnessing, and what is the form of commitment do we need on that? So for me, I think let's trigger the wheel. Once we trigger the wheel, everything will come.
Okay.
Will follow.
Oumar, soon after the Africa Urban Forum, the World Urban Forum will be taking place. What do you hope the world will hear from Africa?
I mean, I think what we have seen today is quite impressive. I mean, Africa used to go outside, but you see people coming from Azerbaijan today, coming from UK, people coming from Turkey, the COP champion. All countries are represented today. It's a strong sign. Africa voice is now giving this trust and the confidence that Africa is open for business. And the urban sector, we have a lot of things we can do. Green energy is happening in the urban setting. Infrastructure development is happening in urban setting. Digitalization is happening in urban setting. Let's bring people here to learn and to deal with African municipalities and see what are the bankable projects. The voice we're going to take to Africa, to the World Urban Forum, to say Africa is ready for business, it's open for business. We are strengthening our institution. We have enabling environment for investment in our cities, and to get more money for our cities, our people. I think for me that's the way should we look at the issues, the way around. Yeah.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Oumar, for making it to join us on the podcast this afternoon. You are watching and listening to the Africa Urban Forum podcast. Keep it here.